I often say there are no truly empty places. Even in abandoned houses, even in ghost towns, there is always something there, waiting to be discovered, or perhaps praying never to be awakened again. If this story has already made you uncomfortable, maybe you should subscribe to the channel. Trust me, the next revelations are even more disturbing. The first time I heard the name Marlowe, I was just an architecture student on exchange in northern England. It was the winter of 2014, and I had been invited by a professor to visit some rural properties left forgotten after the Second World War. The mansion in question was located near the village of Grasmere, on the edge of the Lake District, a remote 19th century structure surrounded by a dense and silent forest, known among locals only as Marlowe House. The facade of the house, built of gray stone and arched windows, already showed clear signs of decay, dry vines covering the front columns, the roof partially caved in, and a strange black soot around the old central fireplace. But there was something beyond the ruined architecture that unsettled me, a suffocating atmosphere, almost physical, that seemed to thicken as we approached the entrance. Just a few meters ahead, a rusted plaque embedded in the ground bore an almost illegible inscription. The family must remain whole, even beyond time. No author, no date, just those words. And for some reason, they chilled me more than the cutting wind from the hills. During the interior inspection, I noticed that many of the rooms were intact, as if the residents had left in a hurry decades ago. Glasses still on the table, a dress hanging behind the door, portraits on the walls with faces partially scratched out by a thin blade. Every detail told a story, or hid a piece of it. In the main hall, something caught my attention. The fireplace, massive, central, carved from stone, adorned with symbols my professor couldn't identify. Intertwined circles, spirals, and a sort of modified Gothic letter engraved in relief, M. It was there, in front of that symbol, that I felt the first sudden vertigo, as if something were pulling me into the structure. A dry chill ran down my spine. At the time, I blamed fatigue. It would be several more years before I returned to that village. After my professor's death in 2022, I received a box containing his personal documents. Among them, an envelope sealed with red wax and the same M crest in high relief. Inside was a letter with no signature. The handwriting was firm, and it began like this: "Behind the fireplace lies what should have been buried long ago. I failed. Now it's your turn." From that point on, everything changed. What seemed like academic curiosity became a personal obsession. I discovered that the Marlowe mansion was not just another forgotten historical structure. It was the epicenter of a lineage marked by secrets, disappearances, and ancestral pacts. And more than anything, there was a pattern. The same names across different generations, childlike drawings hidden in secret compartments, and a ritual that seemed to repeat itself through the centuries with terrifying precision. Now I'm ready to tell this story, how it began, what was left behind, and what may still be happening. But I warn you, not everyone should listen until the end. If you're ready, come with me. The Marlowe family left something behind the fireplace since 1902, and that something is far from dead. When the legal documents arrived, I was in a cramped apartment in Edinburgh, drinking stale coffee and trying to forget about the envelope my professor had left me. But denial, I've come to learn, is a brittle defense. The documents came wrapped in brown paper, bearing the seal of a solicitor's office in Keswick, Cumbria. I opened them slowly, my hands trembling slightly. The contents were as unexpected as they were unnerving. It appeared that my late professor, Dr. Howard Cresswell, had purchased the Marlowe estate under my name 3 years prior to his death. The deed was dated the 12th of February 2019. There was no explanation as to why he did it, only a handwritten note clipped to the last page of the deed. "You will see what I saw, but you must not turn away." I tried to contest it. I tried to return it, but the solicitor insisted. The estate was mine now, and if I didn't claim it by the end of the fiscal year, the property would revert to the local council, where it would likely be demolished due to safety concerns. My name was on every document. I was the legal owner. So, on a cold morning in early November of 2023, I arrived in Grasmere once again. The mist clung to the roads like gauze, and the air smelled of soil and burning wood. The locals had not changed much. Quiet, wary, some nodded politely. Others crossed the street as I passed. The cab driver who dropped me at the gate didn't hide his discomfort. "You sure you want to stay?" he asked, looking up at the moss-covered stone facade. "It's been empty for years. Strange things happened there. That place, it remembers." I didn't answer. The house was even worse than I remembered. Ivy had consumed most of the southern wall, and several window panes were cracked or missing entirely. The wrought iron gate creaked with a rusted groan, and the front door resisted before finally yielding with a heavy, reluctant sigh. Inside, the cold was immediate and sharp, as if the air had never been warmed since the last Marlowe left. Dust lay thick over every surface. The staircase was splintered at the edges, but what unsettled me most was the distinct absence of time, the way everything looked exactly as it had nearly a decade ago, as if no one, not even nature, dared to disturb what had once happened here. I set up camp in the old library. It had once been the heart of the home, judging by the extensive shelving and scattered volumes. The smell of mildew and leather hung heavy in the air. I lit a fire in the hearth for the first time in what must have been decades. The chimney coughed violently, and a cascade of soot spilled onto the stone floor, revealing, buried within the blackened residue, a small rusted latch embedded in the bricks behind the fireplace. I stared at it for hours. I did not touch it. That first night was merciless. The house groaned and whispered. I could swear I heard someone walking down the hallway outside my room at 3 o'clock in the morning. The air smelled faintly of burnt lavender and wax. I dreamt of children's hands clawing at stone walls, of a man's voice repeating, "The offering was made. The circle remains unbroken." In the morning, I explored. The second floor held 5 bedrooms, each in various states of decay. One room, however, was sealed shut from the inside. Its door was reinforced with planks of wood and long, rusted nails. Written on the exterior in faded chalk were the words, "Do not enter, for her sake." That same day, in the attic, I found a trunk filled with old clothes, dolls with eyes missing, and a photo album bound in black leather. Most of the photographs were from the early 1900s, family portraits, hunting parties, women in lace gloves sipping tea, but many of the faces were scratched out. Some entire figures were erased, not just defaced, as if they were never supposed to exist. One photo stopped me cold. A man, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow even in the faded print. He wore a ceremonial robe. Behind him stood a stone altar and 5 hooded figures. The back of the photograph was labeled, "Winter Solstice, Marlowe House, 1902. That year again. The same year etched into the fireplace's foundation stone. I began to dig through the municipal archives in Grasmere's modest town hall. The clerk was reluctant at first, but eventually granted me access to the cellar. The files were chaotic, unindexed, but over several days I uncovered blueprints, tax records, and local registries dating back to the late 1800s. The name Marlowe appeared frequently, a prominent family, landowners, involved in the founding of several civic institutions. But something strange happened after 1902. The family vanished from public records. No births, no deaths, no taxes. It was as if the bloodline had simply evaporated. Then, in a forgotten folder marked Private Correspondence 1902 to 1905, I found a letter that changed everything. Written by a reverend named Elijah Dorn, addressed to the Bishop of Carlisle, dated the 29th of December, 1902. It read, in part, "I beseech you, Your Excellency, to send someone at once. The Marlowes have performed something unholy. The villagers whisper of lights beneath the earth and chanting that lasts from dusk to dawn. I have seen the girl. I know what they've done." There was no reply on file, no investigation, no follow-up. Back at the house, I finally opened the latch behind the fireplace. It released with a groan of shifting stone. Behind it was a narrow crawl space descending into darkness, carved roughly into the earth. The air that rose from it smelled like damp cloth and something sweet, rotting sweet. I have not yet entered, but I will, and whatever I find, I will bring into the light, even if the Marlowes never intended anyone to see it. I waited until the 4th night to descend behind the fireplace. Perhaps I was hoping that time would dull the dread that clung to the latch like dried blood. It didn't. When I finally lifted the rusted handle, it moved with unsettling ease, as if something below had been waiting for me. The passage was barely wide enough to crawl through. I wore gloves and a headlamp, and I carried a recorder in my jacket pocket. The walls were damp stone, etched with markings I couldn't recognize, crude spirals, repeated triangles, and a sigil that appeared every few feet, a circle bisected by a vertical line, with 3 smaller lines branching outward like roots. The air was stifling. After about 20 feet, the tunnel widened into a low chamber, its walls lined with crumbling wooden shelves. The air grew colder as I stepped inside, though I was clearly deeper underground. Dozens of books and ledgers lay moldering on the shelves. Most disintegrated when I touched them, but a few had survived the century. I opened the first intact volume and found the name, Thomas Marlowe, written in an elegant hand. The year was inscribed beneath, 1891. Let the cycle be marked on the night of the 13th moon, one entry read. Only through blood may the boundary be preserved. The roots below hunger, as we above feast. Another entry, dated October 17, 1900, recounted a dream in unnerving detail. The child with no eyes returned again last night. She floated above the fireplace, her skin gray, her hands clasped. She whispered, "You forgot the 13th. The others will come now." As I read, a realization grew heavy in my chest. These weren't just personal journals. They were ritual records. Each generation of the Marlowe family had kept them. There were at least 10 distinct books, each bearing the name of a family member: Thomas, Margaret, Eliza, Thomas again, William, Edith, Thomas again, and always the same seal, the circle and root. I laid the books out on the ground, aligning them by date, and began to map the entries. A pattern emerged. Every 13 years on the winter solstice, an event was recorded, sometimes called the reaping, sometimes the gift, but most often simply the 13th. The descriptions varied in tone and clarity, but certain images repeated with disturbing consistency. A child with hollow eyes, an offering at the altar, a chant spoken in a forgotten tongue, and a warning scratched into stone or flesh: "Do not break the 13." I found drawings too, disturbing sketches folded into the back pages. One showed a circle of 13 figures, arms raised toward a black sun. Another depicted a stone door underground, its surface covered in bleeding hands. Most horrifying was a crude child's drawing on yellowed paper, a stick-figure family around a fire, one figure crossed out violently in red, and a large shadowy form looming behind the chimney. The basement chamber extended further. I discovered a narrow stone stairwell descending deeper, and at the bottom, a locked iron gate, cold to the touch. Behind it, I could see only darkness and a single flickering object, a candle still burning, impossibly untouched by time. I did not enter. Back in the library, I began re-examining the portraits. One in particular caught my attention. It had always hung crookedly, but now I noticed the canvas was thicker than normal. I removed it from the frame and found, concealed within, a second layer of canvas. It bore a hidden painting beneath the official portrait. The outer image showed a Victorian woman in black lace, Margaret Marlowe, as labeled on the frame. But beneath, painted with feverish strokes, was the same woman holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her eyes were wild with fear. Behind her, the outline of the fireplace, and within it, a shape, faceless and pale, crawling forth. The back of the canvas bore a Latin inscription scratched by blade: "Sanguis pro pacto, silio ad perpetuum," blood for the pact, silence forever. That night I listened again to the recordings from the chamber. Beneath my own breathing, faint but unmistakable, came a sound not present in the room: soft humming, a lullaby, repeated, then interrupted by a whisper. It was supposed to be Thomas. There was always a Thomas. Every 13 years, a child chosen. A sacrifice made to preserve something none of them would name. I found town census records in the back of the house, scattered among other damaged documents. The Marlowes were not the only family present in the region through those years, but in every census between 1890 and 1929, one child from a neighboring family had mysteriously vanished, always around December. No records, no funerals, no explanations. In the journal of Edith Marlowe, dated December 22, 1915, the following line appeared, written in a shaking hand. The boy was only 7, but the roots took him quickly. We heard nothing once the stone was sealed. Thomas wept. I did not. Each diary became colder, less remorseful. As the years progressed, the entries grew clinical, methodical. The ritual had become routine, the sacrifice necessary. The root symbol appeared more frequently, scrawled in margins, inked into pages, even burnt into covers. They believed it was the source of their prosperity, their longevity. One final entry stood out. It was the last page of the final ledger, signed only TM, and dated December 21, 1902. "We have broken the 13. No child this year. She will come. I saw her in the smoke, crawling backwards. I saw her hand reach through flame. It was supposed to be Thomas. It was supposed to be me." The handwriting ended abruptly. Below it, scorched into the page, the root symbol, drawn in what appeared to be blood. I no longer doubted what the fireplace concealed. It was never meant to hold warmth. It was a door, a mouth, a wound sealed only by ritual and blood. And now, after over 120 years, the wound was reopening. I returned to Grasmere's town hall with a new resolve, armed with evidence, photographs, copied pages from the journals, the portrait of Margaret Marlowe and her hidden bundle. I told myself I was seeking help, context, maybe even closure. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted someone else to bear the weight of this. The clerk, a gaunt man named Ellis, eyed me warily when I presented the materials. He was nearing retirement, his office a clutter of tea-stained folders and maps of long-defunct bus routes. But when he saw the seal, the circle in the route, his expression changed. He leaned back slowly and closed the file. "I shouldn't talk about this," he muttered. "Not here, not now." I pressed him, told him what I'd found behind the fireplace. I thought he might laugh or dismiss me. He didn't. He asked me to return after closing, after sunset. That evening he met me behind the building, near the disused chapel that now served as the village archive overflow. He brought a flask, and I brought the journals. "I was born here," he began. "My father too, and his father before him. We were told never to go near the Marlowe estate, not because of ghosts or curses, but because of what the village agreed to forget." He opened a weathered envelope and withdrew an old council memo, dated March 3, 1903. It bore the seal of the parish and contained a single sentence. "No further inquiry shall be made into the Marlowe affair. Any request is to be referred to the diocesan office and denied." Signed by 4 council members. All of them, Ellis noted, related by blood or marriage to the Marlowes. He then revealed something else. A box of unpublished editorials from the local paper, the Grasmere Record, between the years 1902 and 1939. They were drafts, never printed. All were marked "rejected" in red ink. One was particularly damning, written by a young journalist named Ansel Pritchard, dated December 28, 1902. "I saw the procession myself, 13 cloaked figures. The child was silent. The chant was not in any tongue I know, and when they emerged, there was one less among them. I will not be silent. I refuse to participate in this conspiracy of forgetting." There was no trace of Ansel Pritchard in any public record after that date. Ellis told me that every family in Grasmere had benefited in some way from the Marlowe estate: scholarships, land grants, debt forgiveness. The Marlowes, he explained, had always held leverage. But it wasn't just money. It was fear, superstition, and something deeper. "They called it the Root Pact," he whispered. "It wasn't written anywhere, but it was understood. Every 13 years someone was taken, always a child, always during the winter solstice. The forest would close in, lights would appear beneath the estate, and after that, the village would prosper." I asked him who they were: the council, the clergy, the keepers of the ledger. He wouldn't say more. The next day I traveled to the Carlisle diocesan office, where records from rural parishes were kept. Most of the staff had never heard of the Marlowe family. But one archivist, a woman in her 70s named Miriam Alcott, paused when I showed her the root symbol. She excused herself and returned nearly an hour later with a box labeled "Suppressed Correspondence, Not for Distribution." Inside were letters from a Reverend Elijah Dorn, the same man whose warning I had found in Grasmere. His final letter, dated January 6, 1903, was never answered. It read, "They did not listen. The girl is gone, and the thing they worship does not forgive delay. I saw its shape behind the veil. I saw its hand on fire. My congregation is silent. My pulpit is ash." There was no record of Reverend Dorn after that. Miriam admitted she had come across references to the root cult in scattered texts from the late 19th century. Most were dismissed as regional hysteria. But the symbol, she explained, had appeared in older contexts: pagan fertility rituals, sacrificial cycles, even Roman rural cults that honored subterranean deities. The number 13 was consistent, as was the belief that blood could bind a community to divine favor, but only if given willingly. Back in Grasmere, I visited the oldest living resident, Abigail Moore, age 96. She lived alone in a crumbling cottage near the edge of the forest. When I mentioned the Marlowes, she stared past me, as if listening to something far off. "I was 9, she said, voice trembling. "I remember the snow that year, and I remember Peter." She paused. "He lived 2 houses down, my friend. We played in the orchard. Then one day he was gone. They said he'd gone to live with cousins, but we knew. We heard the crying from the estate. We saw the lights in the trees. I asked if anyone tried to stop it. Her eyes filled with tears. We were children, and the adults were too afraid." Before I left, she handed me a handkerchief wrapped around a small object. Inside was a rusted key and a note, brittle with age, "For the root cellar, under the east chapel wall." I couldn't open it. Maybe you can. The chapel, long since deconsecrated, stood behind the village hall. I returned at dusk and found the eastern wall partially collapsed, overtaken by moss. Beneath it, after an hour of clearing earth and stone, I discovered a small iron door. The key fit. Inside was not a room, but a hollow. A single crate rested on stone, sealed with wax. Inside were bones, small, delicate, and a bundle of fabric that once might have been a dress. There was also a diary, water-damaged, but legible. It belonged to a girl named Annabeth. The year was 1902. They said I must stay quiet, that it was an honor, but I don't want to go below. I heard the roots speaking. They said Thomas lied, that he broke the cycle. Now I must go instead. The final entry was a single sentence. Please, if you find me, tell someone. So I am. I now understand the truth. The Marlowe legacy was not one of nobility or generosity. It was founded on fear, sustained by silence, and preserved through the sacrifice of the innocent. And the entire village was complicit, not because they were evil, because they were afraid. And fear, when ritualized, becomes tradition, and tradition, when unbroken, becomes worship. I returned to Marlowe House on the eve of the winter solstice. The sky was slate gray, heavy with snow. The trees were bare, their limbs clawing at the wind like supplicants in prayer. Inside the estate, the cold had deepened. The floorboards groaned with my every step, and from the moment I entered, I felt it. Something watching, something waiting. I descended once more through the passage behind the fireplace, deeper this time. Beyond the chamber of journals, past the rusted shelves and damp stone, I followed the stairs to the iron gate I had found before. This time I opened it. The hinges shrieked in protest, and I descended into a catacomb of echoing blackness. My headlamp flickered as I moved, casting trembling shadows along the walls. Symbols were carved into every surface, variations of the root circle, each slightly different, as if evolving, as if alive. At the base of the stairs, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. It was circular, easily 50 feet across, with 13 alcoves carved into the walls. In the center, a sunken pit formed a crude altar of stone and bone. The floor was lined with ancient ash, and something slick shimmered between the cracks. Oil, or something older. Embedded in the stone was a brass ring inscribed with text in Latin and an older script I could not decipher. Atop the altar I found a dried stain, a handprint, small and childlike. Around it remnants of wax, scorched hair and offerings, teeth, buttons, carved wooden animals, tokens of innocence, left behind in the name of protection. This was no symbolic ritual. This was sacrifice in the most literal physical sense. The chamber was a calendar. The 13 alcoves were not random. They were generational, each marked with initials and dates, TM, EM, AM, and always that same root symbol. Each offering renewed the pact, each absence, a crack in its foundation. I moved toward the far alcove, larger than the others. Unlike the rest, it bore no initials, only a Roman numeral 13, the final cycle. As I reached for the alcove, my headlamp failed. Total darkness enveloped me. And then, sound, faint, rhythmic, a chant, not spoken aloud, but humming through the walls, as though the stone itself remembered. Root below, blood above, keep the circle, feed the love. I lit a candle from my satchel. Its glow revealed something I hadn't noticed. A tunnel behind the altar, small and low. Crawling on hands and knees, I followed it for several minutes until the walls widened again into a secondary chamber. This one was different, smoother, more deliberate in its construction. The stone had been polished, and at its center stood a sculpture. It was carved from black granite, humanoid but faceless. Its arms were too long, fingers pointed downward into the floor like roots. Its chest bore the root symbol, burned into the stone, and behind it, a door, massive, seamless, stone fused to stone. The symbol repeated 13 times across its surface, encircling a circular depression the size of a child's skull. The door was not meant to be opened. It was meant to seal something in. On the floor I found a skeleton, small, curled, hands bound with twine. Nearby, a doll with no eyes and a journal nearly turned to pulp. I recognized the name on the cover, Annabeth. The final entry, written in jagged strokes, read, "It was not hungry for me. It was hungry for the lie. They lied. They broke the 13. It came through." The "it" was never named, but as I turned to leave, I felt its presence. Not physical, not even audible, but pressurized, like being underwater beneath something massive and aware. The stone door pulsed faintly with warmth. Back in the main chamber, I took photographs. I documented everything, the alcoves, the altar, the symbols. But as I turned to ascend the stairs, I found the path blocked. Someone was standing there. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but no, there was a figure, tall, wrapped in what appeared to be a ceremonial robe. No face visible, no sound, only that same slow chant humming through the walls. Root below, blood above. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure pointed, not at me, but at the altar, and then it vanished. Not like a person walking away, but like smoke retreating into stone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the library, surrounded by the journals, trying to make sense of what I had seen. When dawn broke, I returned to the fireplace and sealed the passage once more, not out of fear, out of respect. But the story wasn't over. Later that day, I received an email from Miriam Alcott in Carlisle. She had continued digging. Hidden in the diocesan library's non-indexed vaults, she found a manuscript, written in Old Latin, dated to the 11th century. It described a rural sect in the northern fells that believed in a subterranean force called Radix Infernalis, the infernal root, a sentient presence beneath the earth, ancient and cyclical. It demanded offerings not for power, but for containment. The sect believed that if 13 cycles passed without proper tribute, the root would bloom, and what lay beneath would awaken. I remembered the blood-stained page. "We have broken the 13. I called Ellis at the town hall. He didn't answer. I visited his home. It was abandoned. Inside, I found a letter, sealed with wax and left on his table. It was addressed to me. "We thought it was buried, but you've stirred the root. It's moving again. Tell the world, before it blossoms." The final page of the letter bore a symbol I had not seen before, an evolution of the root, now with 2 lines, a fork, a split, a rupture, and with it, a phrase in bold script: "Threen was not the end, it was the seed." I left Grasmere 3 days after the solstice. The snow was falling heavily by then, blanketing the village in silence. I packed the journals, photographs, recordings, and letters into a reinforced briefcase and boarded a train south toward London. There was no plan, only urgency. Something beneath that estate had shifted, and I had no doubt it would surface again if left in darkness. My first step was to contact the Historical Preservation Office. I framed it as an architectural discovery: unregistered underground chambers, undocumented structures of ritual significance, and possible evidence of unreported deaths. That last detail ensured a callback within 48 hours. By the end of the week, I sat in a sterile office in Whitehall, facing a panel of civil historians and legal advisors. I presented everything: dates, names, photos, diary excerpts. I expected disbelief. What I received instead was silence, heavy, professional silence, the kind that marks a truth too inconvenient to dismiss, but too dangerous to acknowledge. Eventually, one of the officials, a woman in a navy suit, leaned forward and asked, "Are you aware of what happens if we declare this a site of national ritual atrocity?" I didn't know such a designation existed. "It means this can never be reopened," she said. "No tourism, no documentaries, no press. It's sealed, and the land is excised from public record." They offered to take the evidence and handle it quietly. I refused. Instead, I reached out to journalists I trusted, old university contacts, freelance investigators, archivists who still cared about stories that mattered. I compiled a dossier and distributed it anonymously under the title The Marlowe Root Pact: 13 Generations of Ritual Sacrifice in Cumbria. Within 72 hours, the dossier leaked to several alternative media platforms. One in particular, the Watchman's Ledger, ran a front-page article with the headline, "Beneath the Hearth, Ritual Sacrifice, Vanishing Children, and the Forgotten Estate of the Marlowes." It went viral. At first, the response was typical: skepticism, ridicule, conspiratorial noise. But then more began to surface. Other estates, other families, readers from other counties reporting similar symbols on old stones, barns, cellar doors. Within a week, local authorities sealed Marlowe House. Within 2, the Ministry of Heritage dispatched forensic teams to the site. What they found was damning: 13 chambers, bone fragments consistent with children under the age of 10, burn marks, carved symbols, a sealed vault deeper than anticipated, constructed with tools unavailable before the 20th century. And in the center, what forensic experts called a sacrificial matrix. I was not permitted to re-enter, but a contact from the team, speaking under anonymity, sent me a photo. The altar had been moved. Beneath it, a stone plaque engraved in both Latin and Middle English. "The 13th broke the pact. The root waits beneath. Shall we starve her again?" The case exploded. National media caught on. Religious scholars debated the meaning of the infernal root, while local officials resigned in clusters. A formal inquiry was launched into the historical suppression of Marlowe records. Grasmere was inundated with journalists, historians, and curious thrill-seekers. The town barricaded its roads within a month, but not everyone wanted the truth exposed. I received warnings, emails, a package containing a child's tooth wrapped in burlap. The message inside read, "We kept it buried. So should you." Yet I pressed forward. Miriam Alcott's research reached the House of Lords. She testified to the ecclesiastical references of Radix Infernalis in suppressed monastic texts. Ellis Moore's testimony, recorded before his disappearance, was played publicly. And then came the final catalyst, the excavation of the root vault. It took 11 days to breach the stone door behind the black statue. When it opened, every light in the excavation flickered and died. Inside, the team found a tunnel of living root, tendrils coiled around fossilized bones, ancient and impossibly preserved. The roots pulsed according to witnesses. They were warm. One worker collapsed. Another screamed until sedated. They spoke of voices, hundreds, chanting the same phrase. "We broke the 13. We broke the 13. We broke the 13. After that, the site was evacuated and permanently sealed. Marlowe House was demolished under emergency ordinance. The ruins were buried under 5 meters of reinforced concrete, then covered with salt and lime. A single sign was erected at the site, bearing no name, only a warning. "This land is closed. Do not return." But some things don't die beneath cement. 3 weeks later, a family in Yorkshire reported their daughter speaking in her sleep, chanting in Latin. She had never studied it. The symbols began to appear on her bedroom walls, drawn in charcoal and spit. She said the pale woman from the fire told her the circle was broken and a new 13 must begin. I followed up myself. The father let me see the drawings. They were identical to those in the Marlowe journals. And the girl's name? Thomasina. The demolition of Marlowe House should have been the end. It wasn't. In the weeks following the government's official statement, calling the site a historical anomaly with ritualistic evidence of abuse and burial practices, communities across northern England began to report strange findings. The symbol, the circle with the root, emerged on weathered stones, cellar doors, and old family Bibles, especially in the border counties. What was once local became national. Soon, other estates were named. Whispers spread from Cumbria to Yorkshire, into Lancashire, even crossing the Irish Sea. A historian in Belfast uncovered a journal from 1787 describing a root god beneath the altar, worshipped by a forgotten sect that had fled the mainland during the English Civil War. The journal was marked with the same sigil, and then came the flood of testimonies. An archivist in Wales confessed that his family had sealed a room in their ancestral home generations ago. Inside, they had found bones, small, human, and a mural of 13 figures around a tree whose roots bled. In Kent, an amateur genealogist traced recurring names, Thomas, Edith, Eliza, Margaret, across 4 generations, all linked to unexplained disappearances. Parliament could no longer ignore it. By February of 2024, a new task force was formed, the Ritual Crimes Historical Inquiry Commission. It was unprecedented, a multidisciplinary body of forensic archaeologists, folklorists, child protection experts, and clergy. Their mission, to trace, investigate, and document any evidence related to what the press now called the Root Cult Network. But as quickly as the task force expanded, resistance followed. Several village councils refused access to church basements. Archives were accidentally purged. Clerks went missing. In one case, a former church warden in Lincolnshire was found dead in his home. A note pinned to his chest that read, "She wakes beneath us. You are feeding her with your questions." Still, the investigation pushed on. Within 6 months, 37 locations across the United Kingdom had been confirmed as having structural or archival ties to root rituals. In every case, certain patterns held true. A lineage bearing recurring names, especially Thomas or TM. A period of unexplained prosperity following child disappearances, the presence of the root sigil carved into stone, wood, or glass. The sealing of underground spaces dated approximately every 13 years. The commission proposed a chilling hypothesis. The Root Pact had not been limited to the Marlowes. It was a network, a coordinated intergenerational web of ritual sacrifice, distributed across the British Isles and possibly into mainland Europe. Each family or community maintained its own variation, but all shared a common thread: 13 cycles, a symbolic pact, and the sacrifice of innocence to ensure continuity. It was not about power, it was about preservation, of bloodlines, of land, of silence. And for every family that confessed, another closed its doors tighter. Public outcry mounted. Demands for restitution were met with confusion. How does one compensate for a child gone missing in 1871, whose name was erased from records? What of the landowners who profited, built schools, hospitals, and libraries on the foundation of sacrifice? Several properties were seized. Others were voluntarily donated to the commission. A memorial initiative began. Simple stone markers carved with the names of children recovered during the excavations. Each stone bore no surname, only the first name and the years missing. By autumn of 2024, the first memorial was unveiled in Grasmere. It stood at the former site of Marlowe House, a black granite obelisk with 13 circles etched along its base. Below it, the inscription, "We broke the 13. Let us not forget the cost." The ceremony was brief. No officials spoke. No ribbon was cut. Only survivors of those who had lived in silence, and those like me, observers, reluctant witnesses, stood in the cold. That night, I walked the village one last time. The chapel was gone, razed like the house. The forest edge was marked with salt lines, but beneath it all, I still felt it, the tremor, the pull, like a heartbeat too deep to hear. In Carlisle, Miriam Alcott was leading a team to digitize every known journal, ritual ledger, and architectural plan recovered from root-packed sites. Their website, roottrutharchive.org, became the central hub for whistleblowers, descendants, and victims' families. I uploaded everything I had, and still, the messages came. One from the Netherlands, another from southern France. A priest from Poland sent an email written in Latin, describing a germinating god beneath the ruins of a 17th century priory. The root was spreading. And then came something that shook me deeper than anything before. A child's notebook mailed to my address. No return. The drawings inside were recent. Colored pencil, shaky hands, but the same imagery. 13 figures, the altar, the root blooming red. The child's name was Thomas. Again. And the last page read, "She forgave the lie. Now she wants truth." One root was cut, but the others, they're still growing. I no longer believe this was just history. It is a living pattern, mutating, adapting, and unless we keep naming it, mapping it, it will plant itself again. I haven't returned to Grasmere since the memorial. The train passes through the region sometimes. I'll catch the name on a weathered signpost or see the outline of the hills etched against the fog, but I never get off. Not because I'm afraid of what I might find, but because I know exactly what's still buried there. Not everything can be unearthed. Some things linger. I kept a box sealed under my bed for months after the last investigation ended. Inside were the original photographs, the fragments of Annabeth's journal, a wax seal from the last ledger, and the rusted key Ellis gave me before he disappeared. There were days I almost threw it into the sea. Others, I thought about sending it to a museum. But something kept me from doing either. Maybe it's guilt, or maybe part of me knows that someone someday will need it again. The final tally, according to the Ritual Crimes Historical Inquiry Commission, identified at least 84 distinct victims across confirmed root-packed locations. Children, nearly all between the ages of 6 and 10, none formally declared dead, none officially buried. Their names are being added to a permanent archive, engraved on what the press now calls the root stones, black granite markers that now stand not only in Grasmere, but in Wales, Cornwall, and soon in Belgium. I was there at the second unveiling. I watched as one mother touched the name of her great-aunt, vanished in 1915, her memory erased until someone found a ribbon in a sealed compartment beneath the floorboards of a chapel. But not everyone accepts the truth. In fact, a growing number of online forums have begun to deny the entire investigation, calling it mass hysteria, modern witch hunting, fabricated trauma. They say the symbols are misread, the names coincidental, the chambers nothing more than ritualistic paranoia projected onto decaying history. They weren't there. They didn't walk beneath the estate, see the walls breathe, hear the chant thrum through stone. They didn't see the photo of Thomas Marlowe holding a girl in his arms while 13 others knelt around the root altar. But I did. So did Miriam. So did Ellis. So did too many others to keep denying. Still, the greatest threat to truth isn't disbelief. It's fatigue. The world moves on. The next horror takes its place. And this one, like so many others, becomes a ghost story, a cautionary tale, something to be whispered at bonfires or debated by conspiracy theorists. But this was real. These children lived. Their blood was taken, their names erased, and some were never found. I keep thinking of that last journal page, the one written by TM just before the final sacrifice was skipped. He wrote, "We broke the 13. She will come for the roots that lied." There's a temptation to see that as the end of it, to close the book, declare the vault sealed, the evil vanquished. But evil doesn't vanish. It adapts. Maybe that's the real curse, not the root itself, but our willingness to let it grow again through silence, through secrecy, through inheritance disguised as legacy. I recently received an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside, a photograph of a cellar wall in rural Vermont, the root symbol drawn in chalk. Beneath it, 301, a new cycle, a new name, a new silence about to take root. So here's what I ask of you. If this story disturbed you, good, it was meant to, because there are more like it. Not in the same house, not with the same names, but with the same silence, the same erasure. Don't let them bury it again. Subscribe to the channel, share this story, leave a comment, name a child, break the silence. Because once, someone behind a fireplace decided they could keep a secret forever, and the root grew. But now, we know where to dig.